Thank you so much for having me, Elliot and Mark. Claudia, that was really wonderful. So, before I begin, I just want to say thank you to my friend Astrid Larange, who directed me toward the work of Angela Metropolis, who I'll be quoting throughout the duration of this talk. The title is Vernon, New Jersey, Injury Census and Augmented Topographies Beyond Action Park. And I'm going to open with two epigraphs. First, Bill Maurer insists that shifts in the way securities are handled recasts the subject of property not as the bearer of rights, but as a risk profile subject to the disciplinary practice of insurance. He goes on to write that at stake is not merely a new definition of property, but a new definition of personhood and a new form of governmentality. Rights and property give way to risk and insurance. Angela Metropolis, it's from her book, Contract and Contagion, From Biopolitics to Economia. The second epigraph, Basalt Island, where birds disgorge what plastic in their stomachs before suiciding like diving into it, rocks and plastic, where countless tuna dashing themselves, countless, against same rocks, soaking them so much, blood, guts, insides mercury, poison where whales and dolphins twist, impossible orgasms, self-beach in dissolution, auto-pillage vectors. That's from Chris Sylvester's Poems About Intern and Phil the Intern. Though other fatalities and innumerable injuries would follow, the Alpine Slide claims the distinction of being the first ride at Action Park to kill. In 1980, according to rideaccidents.com, a malfunction caused a wheeled sled to derail from its cement track after it failed to properly negotiate a curve. The victim, a 19-year-old male employee of the park, was thrown from the car down an embankment. He sustained a fatal head injury when his head struck a rock. He died 8 days later. In a Weird NJ article that will be cited throughout this talk, there's a second, more dubious and unconfirmed disaster noted. On one occasion, some kids supposedly snuck into the park one night to ride the Alpine Slide in the dark. One kid headed down first and just disappeared into the night. His friends could not find his twisted body in the dark until it was too late. If that story is true, it's one death that didn't make the papers. An Alpine Slide isn't very complex. You get in a car that has minimal steering controls and then are shuttled down a fiberglass, in this case, slide. At the time, there were only 2 Alpine Slides in North America. While it was being planned, it was estimated that it'd net 150K to 400K rides annually, and indeed it made well on this promise in spite of the mishap or mishaps. By 1986, the ride was the most popular in the park. Suburban Trends notes that the slide is made of transit material and is environmentally appealing as it sets into the ground. A specific combination of level curves, high curves, and straightaways is determined by a computer program aimed at designing a safe but unusual slide run. In her essay on Action Park for Weird NJ, Joanna Austin cites the Herald as claiming that the slide alone was responsible for more accidents, the majority of lawsuits, and 40% of the citations against the park. It didn't close until 1998. Yet there's a strange detail to the Alpine Slide that's often overlooked, a kind of meditative, representationalist archive that preceded the dive. One would have to first pass a gallery showing pictures of the awful scrapes prior riders had taken. The stated purpose of these graphic images was to encourage riders not to fuck around or else. What's striking about these photos, however, is the implicit tension between voluntarism and exploitation. Given the park's more or less unrelenting reputation for danger, it even had an infirmary on site, so cases wouldn't need to clog the hospitals or, more importantly, raise suspicion. Why should so many commit their bruises, cuts, and scrapes to such corrupted posterity? There's a striving here not for object lessonhood, but for an untoward, masochistic collectivism, a palpable dare, a sharing in willed pain under the guise of family fun. I remember those guys with their shirts off and a nice Alpine Slide burn. Those looked like they hurt. This was a great stroll down memory lane. I look forward to going back someday. I remember on the Alpine Slide, he was wearing polyester Coach's shorts, and he wiped out and slid down the slide on his butt. When he got up, his shorts had melted and were smoking. By now, the mixture of mortification and affection, if not the outright desire to literally possess the source of injury, rendering such a patina of scarred knees and smashed carts, should be apparent. Action Park commentary and accounts online nearly consistently have this dubious bravura to them. But I'm not here to talk on moral codes or insufferably masculinist accounts of self-inflicted harm or stupidity or whatever. You can't break what you never wanted to fix. Rather, it's the documentation, the mereological relationship that arises between risk and the injury census itself as the augmentative possibility of one's immediate landscape providing entertainment destruction, in this particular test case, the town of Vernon, New Jersey, more and more conducive to a virtual, unending theme park disseminating the census and its collection of haphazard narratives, relationships to pardoning, and physio-spatial katabatic eccentricities as exogenous sets of challenges. More simply put, engineering as a formal practice has been radically redistributed as augmentation. But as anyone living in a market democracy knows, you can't have risk without reward. And those rewards, as it were, are largely conducted as insurance and inoculation, as Angela Metropolis would have it. To quote her contract in Contagion again, what Derrida describes as the interplay of protection and destruction in autoimmunization is, perhaps, something akin to the dual senses of economic risk as gain and loss. But vaccination, more specifically, in the administration of small doses of a disease to provoke the body's generation of antibodies, runs counter to the boundary protection of epidemiology, as Derrida contends, but also relies upon a history in which the border between insurable and uninsurable risk, prudentialism and gambling, self-possession and people as property is constantly blurred and reconstituted as its very conditions of possibility. This blur is fundamental to the meta-variation between the injury census and the advent of augmentation. Even more so, the injury subject, or park attendee or employee, may ostensibly be transmuted or disfigured physically and ontologically. As a former Action Park employee divulged to Weird NJ, Action Park attendees were affectionately referred to as Gumbies because you bounced off the ground when you hit. This is quite striking and important to our extrapolation of the injury census, as Gumbies are not only the casual, comical de-anthropomorphizing of partakers' contained or bounded risk, but a unitary vector for homogeneous mutilation and resilient tourism. All too demonstrative of this macabre rubberiness and pop was Action Park's Motor World, which gave attendees the opportunity to control various vehicles, including go-karts, boats, and even tennis ball firing tanks. I'd like to quote at length from Weird NJ, as it most effectively conveys this miasma of causal fuckery. Patrons treated the super go-karts like bumper cars, which caused serious head-on collisions. One employee recalls hearing the sick snap of a patron's arm breaking as a result of a crash. The tank ride, while perhaps not the most dangerous ride for park attendees, was certainly the worst assignment for park employees. Not because of the people driving the tanks, but because of the tennis ball shooting guns that surrounded the ride. Patrons had the fun-filled opportunity to shoot tennis balls at people in the tanks. So, should a park employee need to go down into the tank pit on the occasion of a crash or stuck tank, park attendees could happily fire away at them. The super speed boats could go up to 35 to 40 miles an hour and were treated like bumper boats by park attendees. They were also set up in a swamp, in the middle of which was a small rocky island populated by an uneasy alliance of water snakes and lifeguards. One day, two park attendees were driving their boats into each other and they crashed. One of the boats flipped over, its driver strapped in and stuck underneath the water. The lifeguard on duty had to dive into the swamp, where he reports that he was followed by all of the snakes that were in the company that day. Here, the injury census is conveyed ballistically, a slew of charges and collisions that are notable for the means of instrumentality and autonomy given the Gumbies, and, as such, an eerie predecessor to the smartphones that will characterize widespread augmentative perception and practices. It is also a chaos that paradoxically immures risk. As Gilles Châtelet puts it in To Live and Think Like Pigs, chaos is by no means free of equivocation. It brings together two seductions, that of the comfort of operativity and that of a marveling in the face of all that is just on the verge of appearing. Loved that place. Went from 86 to 1990. Loved Motor World and the Indy cars. Fastest go-kart I've ever been on. Got kicked off in 89, hit a cone and retire. Went over the yellow line. God, I missed that place. Also, went on Aero Ride, first year it opened. That was fun. Sad to see it in ruins. P.S. Anyone know where I can buy one of those cars? Now, we must move into the present, where the injury census need not yoke its entertainment to a fixed location. It should come as no surprise that my talking on this front will focus primarily on Pokemon Go, which is situated as a kind of hunting, exploration, training synthesis wherein individuals have the entire world, or a double of the world, as their playing field. Yet rather than glom onto a Deleuzian line of flight fetishization or epidemiological discourse, we've already had those parties, I'd like to focus on its functionality with respect to this talk on Vernon, New Jersey, its use as a kind of insurance. In private correspondence, Eddie Hopley referred to this tactic as that Pokemon money, a cultural capital that one accrues via critical correspondence with this astoundingly popular game, a kind of Pavlovian trick that forges immediate receptivity between presenter and enthusiasts. That Pokemon money represents, to use Metropolis's terminology, the inoculation against the rickety trajectory of the injury census as it is established and or wrought by Gumby subjects and augmentative possibilities alike. To be metaphorical about it, my boat flipped over a long time ago, and the snakes, i.e. injury manifolds, keep nipping at my gradually drowning body. I must return to the air of Pokemon Go, which is everywhere, a shiny Bulbasaur or a menacing Weedle to supplant this random and moronic clicking around I have to do to talk. Moreover, the tactic clears the way for the introduction of ruin theory and a more pristine consonance between the stakes of this deaccession take on the injury census and the resurrection of its inanity via public recognition. If risk theory refers to a body of techniques that measure the risk associated with a portfolio of insurance contracts and the evolution of the insurance company over periods of time, ruin theory takes an interest in the possibility of the surplus becoming negative, and thus the destruction of the insurance company. The aggregate claims made herein presuppose that Pokemon money may safeguard the company of the talk, but must also conduct it as a potentially defective distribution of claims, or that the stochastic interest accruing will not outprovide the net worth of the injury census. We must not only circumvent the landscape as a whole, but exponentially endure the operational risk of such sloppy theorizing. To name one other example before we proceed, there is a ruinous relationship between the implications of a talk, i.e. an unmediated oral address, and the fact of reading off an iPad, the latter of which we might depict as the insurer, the efficacy or hermeneutic quality of the information provided as a probability coefficient in relation to its succumbing to, again, sloppy theory. What's a harness to a ride that doesn't work? Decoration? The specter of regulation? In any case, Vernon, New Jersey is basically unstoppable now, unstoppably injurious. The advent of Action Park, indeed the brazen Gumby's Gomorrah, is now irrevocably ubiquitous in spite of its initial closure in 1996. Has Vernon absorbed it, or vice versa? Globally, we have more than enough evidence that the injury census is on something of a major sweep. A man in Melbourne crashed his car into a school. Someone fell in a ditch, I remember seeing on Reddit. An Israeli man was hospitalized after hitting a glass door. More commonly, Metro cites the most frequent injuries while playing Pokemon Go as sunburn, blisters, and mental health effects. So, on my way home from my 7-hour skateboarding/Pokemon adventure, I saw 2 Pokemon 3 steps away that I didn't have, a Clefairy and a Staryu. The Clefairy wasn't hard to find, but it was outside a hotel, and the people on the ground floor probably thought I was a creep outside their windows at 11 p.m. We saw each other, but they closed the curtains. But I didn't care. I caught a new Pokemon. Onto the Staryu, I searched all over and couldn't find it. Then started skating along to the highway to where I hadn't looked yet. As I came to the bridge, I first saw the Staryu pop up under. I planned on skating over it to find when I suddenly hit a 2-inch lip on the sidewalk, throwing me a few feet from my skateboard, cutting up both my arms, bruising my wrist and knee. All excited, I tried taking my puppy on her second walk to gather Pokemon with me. She wasn't really going fast enough, nor in the direction a lurking Eevee was, so I put her inside and decided to bike. Caught 6 Pokemon on my block, then made to go to the blue icon on my map a little away. I knew people were saying to look up from your phone while playing, so I did every so often. Apparently it wasn't often enough, because as soon as I turned off my street, I hit a pothole and flew off my bike. 4 of my fingers on my right hand are swollen, along with skid marks on my right shoulder, both knees, and my wrist. Next time I'm walking. Metropolis writes, "It is impossible to separate the development of insurance and risk from that of the history of the plagues. Indeed, like insurance, the injury census is deeply invested in, again via Metropolis, what Andrew Cowell calls a generalized credit, which takes up postponing debts of time, life, penance, retribution, and money indefinitely. The injury, in this sense, is an implementation that indefinitely delays the holism of the body, of health. In turn, the Pokemon objects may be said to absorb or even reflect the injuries inflicted on the hunters, and as bizarre fictional creatures or outgrowths, no less. The logic of risk distribution is, again, in variance with whatever contractual arrangement defines it. And as a tangent of sorts, if we were to sprinkle some of Cian and Guy's thinking regarding the cuteness of the avant-garde on this desiccated admixture of self-destruction and ruinous business, we could refer to this, quote, "It is only a short step to see how the formal properties associated with cuteness, smallness, compactness, softness, simplicity, and pliancy, call forth specific affects, helplessness, pitifulness, and even despondency. And what's cuter than a Dory Tarzan, which may be defined as a bioneurological host of risk enforcing the duplicity of the world via augmentation, or a constant in the injury census to topography meteorological scheme of Vernon, the little lost fish who may traverse the wild on account of its supernatural heroism. The Dory Tarzan makes for an empathetic figure, one given to the liminality between civilization and the violence of nature. But it is also sheer ridiculousness, a bonk on the head when one just wants to take a stroll. It is a hyper-Gumby. But now to return to Action Park and its other major locus of danger, Waterworld. Let's talk about the Cannonball Loop first. A straight, steep blue slide with a sharp loop at the end, the completion of which spits the slider into a shallow pool of water. It makes for an extremely nightmarish situation, only rendered too true by those who wrote it. Given the severity of the loop and the sharpness of the drop into the pool, it wasn't hard to find the back of your head smacking the end of the slide. Some it knocked unconscious just before the plummet into water. Others would have to use the escape hatch at the top of the loop if they couldn't make it around. Surprisingly, the slide actually never killed anyone, but its capacity to inflict harm is well documented, and it remains an icon of the park's malignant danger. Rumor has it, it decapitated a test dummy. As a former employee put it, the Cannonball Loop was the brainchild of some Swiss guy they imported on a week-long visa. I was one of the idiots that accepted you-know-who's crisp $100 bill to test run it. That was my last ride. $100 did not buy enough booze to drown out that memory. There was plenty more to love in Waterworld. The roaring rapids, which was a kind of whitewater rafting simulation. Surf Hill, meanwhile, was known as the backbreaker. Then there's the Tarzan swing, off of which one could plunge into water so cold it literally killed someone in 1984 by giving them a heart attack. I also remember the cannon slides, which I ended up banging my head around one of the turns in the tube, then being spit out into ice-cold water, barely being able to catch my breath. But beyond all these, and indeed the end of our journey, is the tidal wave pool, or as it was more colloquially known, the grave pool, via Weird NJ. The tidal wave pool was a huge freshwater pool, 100 by 250 feet long and 8 feet deep, that could hold 500 to 1,000 people. 4 large fans forced air into the pool and created waves, which could reach a height of 40 inches. The waves were generated for 20 minutes at a time, with 10-minute breaks in between. 2 people drowned in the grave pool, a 15-year-old boy in 1982 and an 18-year-old man in 1987. Many more have come close, despite the fact that 12 Red Cross certified lifeguards were stationed at the pool at all times. Former employees claimed that these 12 teenage lifeguards had to make upwards of 30 rescues a day, which is ridiculously high. Most lifeguards make 1 or 2 rescues all summer. Yet, we must stop here because it is kind of abyss by comparison or in relation to the injury census. The grave pool is the true bottomless pit, the thing we can gaze into but must dare not take on. It is too close to the border, the line, life and death hang in the balance. It is not quite injury, trauma, no doubt. Yes, yes. We should not drown, we would be retrieved before the snakes could completely eat this little fish, us little fish. And our investigation can go no further. The grave is not the purview of the injury census. One must bend or break, but not obliterate as such. It's important to remember that risk in actuarial literature often stands in for a portfolio of policies. It's a term that suggests the doom of the set. When the surplus falls below 0, the insurer has run out of money and it is said that ruin has occurred. If the probability of ultimate ruin is tempered by that Pokemon money, which temporarily denies insolvency, even if its only strategy is that of reinsurance by way of theory employed. Still, one must not hesitate to regard the Dory Tarzan as an acerbic, demonological inference given by augmented topography, such that its mere appearance may perpetuate premium loading factors, the potential clarity of net reinsurance. I went on the Tarzan swing several times. Once, while passing over the water, I couldn't quite pull myself up, so I skimmed it and slammed into the water on my face. The skin under my arms was transparent, and you could see all my veins, etc., clear as crystal. I was freaked, and certainly never experienced anything like that before. I thought I'd have to go to first aid, but in about 30 minutes, I was fine. Thank you.